at the AISD Caruth Center. Thank you for being here at the Board Auditorium and trying to adapt to our parking challenges. Welcome, everybody. We've got members of the City Council and the County Commissioners with us, but we do not have a full quorum, so we'll not take action at this time on the items on the agenda for which there's action. However, we are looking forward to getting updates on several matters. So we will move quickly to the update on the discussion of Connecting the Dots, which is our broad-based initiative with multiple prongs. So welcome, everybody. Mr. Waxler, you want to kick this off?
I absolutely do. Thank you very much. This really will be pretty quick. Just want to bring to everybody's attention that this was a multi-prong initiative on the Joint Subcommittee's agenda. And the first piece of it had to do with just laying the foundation in the district. It had to do with technological capacity. It was about creating some sort of software program where you could go for a one-stop shop. And we have been really very successful with this. In addition to the foundation, there were task forces that were considered to be part of this initiative, and each of these task force recommendations were to be linked to the ECST so that important information, though protected as private information, so that people only with a need to know could get at the information, would at least have the ability to get at the information, so that in terms of interventions and figuring out what a student may need to do better on attendance or behavior or academics, that it would be right there. And again, those task forces were the Judicial Supports Task Force, and Ms. Fleming will be talking a little bit about that in terms of the implementation of those recommendations. Workforce development, affordable housing, you do have a report from that task force in your materials. Meg Pogue will join us a little bit later to talk with you about the literacy task force. And the last one that you created as part of this initiative was the mentorship task force. I'm pretty amazed at how often the members of this task force are meeting, nonprofits and city, county, district representatives. They're pretty excited, I think, about the recommendations they will bring to you at your next meeting in December. So this is just some of the specifics about what we're doing with ECST, and I think the biggest shout out is to the Family Resource Centers. This is probably supportive of their efforts more than any others, and we can see the good outcomes as a result of that linkage. We've talked about these, and I think I'm wrapping up my report with that. Unless there are any questions, I will turn it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Mel. That was a quick report. Thank you.
There you go.
Considering we didn't see the slides, I'm presuming they were really meaty.
They were really meaty, and if
Thank
anybody wants to pour over them later, come see me.
Okay, let's open up for comments and questions. Ms. Morrison, Councilman Morrison.
Thanks, Mel. Do I need to push this to be on?
It's on.
I'm not seeing any red light. I'm going to keep going. I think I'm
You're
on.
on.
About that software project that we had going, is that implemented now? And can you tell us a little bit more about
You
that?
bet. This is part of the mobility task force. We are in the, just beginning actually, the second year of the 3-year initiative. Susan Millay is in the audience. Susan, I don't know if you want to join me for a quick, because you've got the depth on this. But things are moving, and remember, the ECST software project is internal to the Austin Independent School District.
Correct.
And the one you're asking about is to link the city, county, and district data.
Right.
So Susan, please.
Okay. So am I on? Yeah,
Yes.
I am. Okay. We are not quite entering the second year of the funded. The first year of effort was really around developing an RFP and getting that posted, selecting the vendor, et cetera. The current contract, the vendor has been selected, the contract's gone through. We have gone through the design process, we've gone through the development process. We are currently in the early stages of implementation. We've done some training, and we will continue to do some more training during the month of October. But we're up and running with it. The contract for year one runs through the end of the calendar year, and so we will start the second year in January. And I think some of the major successes have really been around the negotiation of shared consent and how we're working with that, and there are a lot of legal issues and data sharing issues that we need to negotiate with that. We also have developed the capacity to capture electronic parent signature and to share information between the integrated case management system, which is on the community side, and AISD, allowing the parents to consent to allow information about student attendance and behavior to be shared back with the Family Resource Center so that they can monitor the impact of their work. The other thing that's happening with the implementation of the system is that we have a tool now where we can actually measure family progress over time across 18 different domains, and that will help us to build a knowledge base locally to really understand these highest need families, what their basic needs are, and also what their strengths and assets are in problem solving, and see them develop over time.
Thank you. I think that this is really an advanced concept, that we're actually taking a holistic, implementing a holistic view. And we all of our jurisdictions participated in funding this and supporting this. And so I also want to mention that the effort that we're undertaking in Health and Human Services, and actually in youth services overall, is to try and get a more holistic view of services and programs that are available, to be able to figure out where our needs are, where our gaps are, where our redundancies are. So this is really, I think that this is really a shining star example of how we can move forward.
Thank you. I think as we move forward, that one of the things that Mel is championing there are about 5 or 6 different pieces of technology that really make this whole thing come together for connecting the dots, and we've had to develop them as independent components. Our next steps, once we get this piece implemented, will be figuring out how to really make those different components truly interoperable with one another.
Thank you, Susan, and we are really lucky to have you as part of this team, because you understand the technology, but you also totally get the needs and
Thank you.
the human element.
Thanks.
Mayor.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the appropriate item to bring this up on, but if it's not, you can just tell me after I brought it up. But it does have to do with the holistic approach. And as we all remember, some time ago, the Austin City Council decided that it would be really nice to consider the school district's interests whenever we handle land development issues, zoning and so forth. And so it passed a resolution saying there would be, along with the zoning change requests, there would be an impact statement from AISD. And I think all the people that are city representatives on this committee were instrumental in doing that, and it was a good thing. So subsequent to that, we realized that the city of Austin also contains other ISDs. In fact, we have 7 independent school districts, parts of them, within the city of Austin. So decided to extend that initiative, the impact statement request, to the other districts. So passed this resolution, and Councilmember Tovo, thank you for bringing it. Yeah, and it was sponsored by the 3 of us who sit on this committee. I'll pass out a copy just for your information. And again, the purpose of this is to integrate planning issues with school planning issues so that we'll be working on the same page.
And
Hope that was in order to bring that up.
can't imagine that wasn't in order, Mayor. Also, just so you'll know, members will have an additional opportunity to talk about this as part of Roman numeral 6, and there actually will be city district staff here to carry forward on the conversation that you started at the last meeting, or at least continued at the last meeting.
Well, I think it's appropriate, particularly given the Connecting the Dots, which has such a broad umbrella to it. But as we know, many of our students move in the mobility side of this thing, and they hop between school districts. They may stay in the city of Austin or within the county, but sometimes they're moving between school districts, crossing streets, moving to new apartments. And that approach of really considering all the school districts is important, because we are trying to do a much better job of coordinating within Austin ISD. But we have kids that move between Austin and Del Valle, Austin and Pflugerville, and sometimes back during the same school year. And so to the extent that we can all understand the educational impact of things and coordinate better across the region, it's great. So thanks for doing that. Other questions or comments on this update at this point? Judge?
Did we provide full funding for the other project?
The one that Susan was just talking about, you did.
I'll talk for a minute. I wanted to add something. I think that the idea of being able to look at the educational impact is terrific. I want to mention that I think what was just passed out is a little bit different. What was just passed out is a resolution that we passed yesterday. Yes, this is actually a resolution, and I think it was actually Councilmember Tovo, the mayor, and Mayor Pro Tem, perhaps, that sponsored it.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I set up the mayor unintentionally.
Nice job.
Okay,
Oh,
y'all
very
talk on
successful
yourself,
in
and we'll sit back.
Yeah, why don't you explain what this is?
Well, I was trying, I'm going to actually ask to see what has been passed out. What I was trying to provide the mayor with to pass out was the resolution we passed yesterday, which, as you said, was sponsored by Mayor Pro Tem Cole, Mayor Leffingwell, and I was a co-sponsor on that as well, which is, we had a lot of issues yesterday. So both discussions were correct. We did pass a resolution related to the educational impact statement, as the mayor suggested, and this applying it to other districts and following up on a previous resolution. The other resolution that you've got in front of you was authorizing the city manager and the appropriate city staff to take the necessary steps to prepare and file an amicus brief expressing the city's statement of interest in support of the litigation on behalf of the area district. So that is, I think, also relevant in many ways to connecting the dots, and relates to Mayor Leffingwell's point about the city's commitment to working with the school district in any way that we can to be supportive of your efforts. So you may have gotten one or the other of those resolutions, both of
Thank you
which
for
were
both of them.
passed yesterday,
Thank you
both of
both.
which are related to the work we're doing here.
Absolutely. Mel?
Being very involved in this lawsuit, I cannot tell you how meaningful this is. I talked with the attorneys who are representing us, all the plaintiffs, yesterday. They are very grateful. We are very grateful. And I'm hoping, as the attorneys are hoping, that the city of Austin just has set the example for cities all across the state of Texas to do the same thing. So thank you.
It is really important. We very much appreciate it. And I think it really does tie into this work, because one of the many challenges that we face, right, is that the school district has had significant budget challenges. We've been flat, or in the past couple of years have had to go down. Much of what's been cut has been not only in the classroom, but it's outside the classroom. It's the social service supports that we provide to kids directly or fund others to do. As we know, the economy's been soft, so the nonprofits are struggling to meet the needs. Because the economy's soft, there's a lot more people that have needs. And so this Connecting the Dots has been such an important initiative to try to bring all of us together to meet the needs of families and children in our community. And this is of great help, because we need some funding support to enable some of these good ideas that are out there to actually have the resources to be successful. Because the ideas are great, but at some point you do need a little additional resources to help. So thanks for the support. Other questions or comments on this item? I'm going to throw one just, Mel, as it relates to it's a little bit of a shout out about the importance of the mapping and the coordination. I know you talked about Family Resource Center and the information sharing, but I see Suki in the audience, and I went to a CIS luncheon yesterday at Pierce, and she had 7 students at Pierce that were speaking. And they got up there and talked about the importance of CIS and what a difference it made in their life. But as they got up there and they were telling a little bit of their stories, and it was incredibly compelling, and there were tears, actually, from on the students and the people listening about the needs. But they described their family circumstances and realizing that not every kid comes to school equally prepared or with every opportunity to take advantage of what school does, how important it is for community organizations, the governmental entities, and others in the community to work together to meet the needs of these children. You know, and it was great to see what CIS is doing for some of these kids, and we know that for every one of those kids they're being served by CIS, there's probably just as many that are not getting the services they need. And it sounds like this effort will actually help us better understand who's out there, what services they need, who's receiving services, who's not, and how do we support the families so the kids can be successful in school. So it's a wonderful initiative. Thanks for doing it. Okay, so let's move to the next item, if it's okay, to the judicial supports update. Ms. Fleming, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We have provided a written report from the Judicial Supports Task Force, but I will just give you an overview. There's been a great deal of work that has been underway. Okay, I think I may have it this time. There's been a great deal of work that has been underway sort of simultaneously. The first significant piece being an interlocal agreement between the city and the county regarding the funding piece related to this project. And so my last word was that we are very, very close. So looking forward to all of you approving that document in the near future. Secondly, this is a project, as you might imagine, the opportunities versus the devil is in the detail. And so staff has been working with an implementation team that includes many members of the original Judicial Supports Task Force who have generously given up their time to serve on the implementation team to try to iron out the process in which we would refer and have students and families benefit from the recommendations and ultimately become a part of the Neighborhood Conference Committee program. And so that has been the work that staff has been engaged in over the last several months, is working with the principals in the schools so that they are aware of the program coming online, as well as making sure that the necessary statutory requirements are met, and we've had a few conversations with the school district general counsel about that. So I believe we're on task. It takes quite a bit of time, as you can imagine, with the complexity of all of our operations, to make sure that everybody's interests are met. So I believe that we are well on our way to finalizing the interlocal agreement, which will then allow us to hire the personnel necessary to actually implement the recommendations made by the task force.
Okay, great. Questions or comments? Councilwoman Morris.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We've been looking forward to this. Can you perhaps just give us a 25-word summary so we can all remember exactly what we're talking about in terms of what the program's going to look like?
Absolutely. The Judicial Supports Task Force recommended that the Neighborhood Conference Committee, which is a program right now of Travis County that has been in existence for many, many years. It's a collaboration between the District Attorney's Office, the Health and Human Services Department, and the Juvenile Probation Department, all Travis County agencies, to intervene prior to young people becoming a part of the juvenile justice system. And so it's taking that model to work with families who are referred because of truancy issues. And the idea behind that is we have community volunteers in the Neighborhood Conference Committee, as well as a case manager who works with the family to really address the underlying issues that contribute to truancy. We know truancy is the problem that we see, but the underlying causes have to do with a lot of the basic needs and social services needs that we deal with on a daily basis. And so the Neighborhood Conference Committee is a way to not only bring the community into this discussion around truancy and having the child and the family realize that they are part of a community that cares about this issue, but also to establish some guidelines and parameters by which the family can receive the supports that they need so that the child will ultimately improve their attendance at school. Now, this program, as you can imagine, was not originally designed to be a truancy program. So we have had to, make some adjustments to the program in order to meet the necessary statutory requirements, and we've done so in consultation with the judges who will be seeing these cases. And of course, this is a pilot that you all approved. The City of Austin has put forward funding, which has resulted in the need for the interlocal agreement. And the county will actually hire the personnel and train them in the Neighborhood Conference Committee model to work initially with Judge McKee's court at Municipal Court to work with the families who are referred under this model.
And thank you for that. And you brought up Judge McKee's, that's of course municipal court. And so can you talk a little bit about, so kids that might end up for curfew or other misdemeanors in our municipal courts, are they going to be woven into this model also?
Not initially, but it's interesting, council member, that you bring that up, because I was just having a conversation with Judge Sines about the idea that we know that many of the kids do have other Class C misdemeanors that they are facing, and we were discussing the opportunity that we may have to barter, for lack of a better word, with the family, with the truancy issue. If there are other C misdemeanors that the kids are facing, we may be able to set those aside if they are progressing in their, improving their truancy. So, Judge Sines has been one of the chairs of this committee and has been very interested in this issue. And so I feel like, they're continuing to brainstorm ways to ensure that we sort of have a one-stop approach to the kids who are in this program. So while it's not initially designed to address those things, they certainly will come up as the cases come before the court.
Great. Well, I'd like to see, I hope that we can make that a priority, because one of the things that I found so interesting and where we had room for improvement in the beginning was that we have kids that, for the same action, being truant, being out on the street, may end up with a truancy violation and a curfew violation. So for the very same action, they're going to two different courts, and that really doesn't make any sense. So I think that should be a priority. I understand there's a lot to get it up and going, and to be able to merge those, obviously, is going to be a lawyer's dream, I'm sure, to try and make that happen. It'll be very complicated.
An in-house counsel's dream.
Yeah, right. But I think that would be, from the city's perspective, I think just a huge improvement in terms of a holistic approach to a child. And you've mentioned a little bit of really trying to start merging that in the discussion. But I would really love to see that as a priority for trying to improve that. And I wanted to mention one other thing. I noticed yesterday we approved a grant on our agenda accepting funds through the police department, and it was a Justice Department grant, and it was about juvenile justice. And things were a little crazy. It was a big agenda. I didn't have too much time to delve into it, but it is funds for serving kids and looking at root causes and things like that. So, Mr. Lombreros, I was going to suggest that maybe we delve into that, because that could be an opportunity to bring some other resources, to coordinate some other resources.
I'll be happy to personally talk to APD and the staff there and figure out how we can connect that back to this effort. They actually have, we have had folks from APD involved in this issue as well, so we'll definitely follow up on that.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'm always excited to delve into the resources of the City of Austin, so thank you so much for that. I would also add that it was a big interest, I believe, of the community as well, to look at ways that we can serve the families more holistically, whether it be other Class C issues that the child that in question may have, but also if we have multiple truancy issues with children in the same family. Mm-hmm. So, create sort of a way to deal with all of it at one time versus having the family come back multiple times because they have different children with different issues.
Absolutely. And in that case, it may well be that the same root cause, the same issue caused the truancy challenge in the first place.
Absolutely.
For all the kids. Thanks.
Other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you all very much for that update. We'll now, can we move to the next item? You ready? I love just seeing you all just sit there, just perched, ready for the next thing. So with discussion about the Family and Children's School Work Group. How do you want to handle this? Councilmember Tovo.
So we have talked about this several times before. I think we talked beginning last fall about the idea of pulling together some individuals in the community to form this group. And at our June, was it June? Yes, our June meeting, the city had proposed some members, and I think we more or less kind of blessed them. I believe Judge Bisco and others wanted to put forward some names, so we kind of agreed that would be a dynamic process. We did get some recommendations from Trustee Bradley, Mr. Lumbreras. I'm not sure if you and Mr. Wexler, and I'm not sure if the AISD has coordinated who they would like to participate, but that's certainly a possibility. I know there have been some questions about kind of what this group will do, because it's been a long time. We've talked about it over a long time. So I very quickly this morning drafted up, a couple kind of key points. So, and I realized as we were talking that I forgot one of them, so to include it on there. So as Councilmember Morrison pointed out, we did have a very full agenda yesterday. So
We're just glad you're here. Thank you.
well, and apologies for walking in late. Let's see, I think, Mayor.
Oh, goodness. Thank you.
And really, this group will kind of pick up on some loose ends, as we've discussed. My idea for it was that this group would kind of pick up on some of the recommendations that had been suggested by other City of Austin or AISD or both planning groups, and kind of take us in hopefully some new directions. But of course, your suggestions and feedback and ideas are very welcome. At this point, the group hasn't met yet, so this is a great time to put some ideas forward so that the staff can convey those to our membership. I've tried to capture some of the previous related actions that I thought were relevant. The one that I did forget to put on is really a critical one, and that was the City Council's resolution in 2011 to look for explicit ways to partner together. And that was, I believe, sponsored by Mayor Leffingwell, Councilmember Morrison, and Councilmember Shade, who's all served on the joint subcommittee. Is that correct? No, didn't serve on the joint subcommittee. And that has resulted in some potential collaborations and also a list of ideas that the staff have put together. So that would be another previous related action. I don't know how much we want to talk about the previous related actions because we've talked about them in the past with relationship to this work group. One of the pending issues that I believe has been recommended a couple times is the first one on this list, that the City of Austin and AISD should collaborate to develop a joint plan by the end of 2009 to reverse the trend of the declining enrollment in Central City schools. And one specific policy direction that has been recommended by several bodies has been this idea of joint use collaborative facilities. It's come up in multiple ways, and certainly we've got some examples of great collaborations, joint use operations right now. There have been some challenges associated with those, and so that might be one of the first things that our work group does, is to look at, to talk to staff, to talk to community members and see what some of those challenges have been. There are some great best practices around the country that they could look to for some potential policy ideas or some practice recommendations. But my thought was to kind of bring together a group of committed, interested, engaged community members and let them see, what other new directions we might take. We've got several times in recent years there have been potential closures of Central City schools. At each time, our city leadership has certainly expressed a willingness and interest in working together with the school district and the county and other partners to try to reverse that trend or reverse that possibility. So this is a good opportunity, I think, to get some thought as to what steps might make a meaningful impact.
Okay. Mayor.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me, I think it'd be useful to get an update. There were recommendations made in 2011, what has actually been accomplished there. Councilmember Tovo mentioned one, joint use facilities. See what we've actually done on that. And another one that I remember is making it possible for AISD to use some APD assets wherever that's appropriate, and see what we've done. I think that would be a good thing to maybe start off that committee discussion with.
I have a couple questions.
Judge?
So how many persons do we have on the committee thus far?
Thanks for asking that question, Judge. The names we discussed at our last meeting totaled 6. Susan Moffett, Heather Way, Kevin Foster, Ed Wendler Jr., Nadia Barrera, and Maureen Matoya. And I did, as I mentioned, get some recommendations from Trustee Bradley. Trustee Williams, perhaps you all could put your heads together and think about who you want to participate. And Judge, I know you had expressed an interest in thinking about that too. And since our group hasn't begun, perhaps we could just ask the staff to collect those names and gather together.
Put to bless it at the county. Ms. Fleming and I need to take this item from the middle of our list of things to do and move it to the top, which we will do.
And I should have mentioned that I met earlier this week with Trustee Schneider, and we talked a little bit about this, and he pointed out, made the very good point that it would be helpful if we could provide the work group with some idea of what is expected from them in terms of an outcome, metrics, or some other concrete goals. The only one I really have to offer at this point is that I think actionable policy recommendations would be useful. We've had several groups who have made more sweeping suggestions. They've looked at the problem and they've made some general suggestions, but what we probably are ready for now are some more focused action steps and policy recommendations.
Mr. Roxler, did you want to say something in response to that?
No, except to say that, excuse me, we have been in touch with our board members through what the superintendent calls her board weekly update. Mr. Schneider, Trustee Schneider, has made a recommendation, which I believe I've shared with my colleagues, and I believe that President Williams is thinking about an individual that actually came to our attention through one of our campuses. So we will go back at this point, reconnect with our board members, and again, see if we can't bring some closure to this so that we can move on.
Councilman Morris?
Thank you. A couple of things. I wanted to throw out one idea that the working group might think about. I was a couple of years back, I was at a conference in Arlington, Virginia, talking about neighborhoods and schools. And by the way, they were very impressed with this committee and the staff working together. And one of the studies that they had done, which I found really fascinating, was a pretty in-depth study of the kinds of housing that kids lived in their city. And, it's sort of some maybe basic information that might take some coordination to get our demographers together and things like that. But that could be insightful and could drive some recommendations on I think, frankly, recommendations to the city about trying to incentivize or prioritize different kinds of housing. So that's one specific thing that I think could be helpful to me in my work. I think could help us on a better path. And then in terms of the 2011 recommendations, I did want to mention that there were a lot that were put on the table. I know staff worked very hard on that together, and we are continuing to see the fruits of that work. And I was going to call you, President Williams, to let you know this was happening. It was a couple of weeks ago that we approved a couple of items that really show some good work between the city and the school district. One was to, I believe, and you might be able to help me, Bert or Mel, for us to include you all in our cooperative purchasing agreement so that you can actually take advantage of some of the purchasing systems that we have that can bring you less expensive contracts. And I know I'm not using the right words, but.
I know what you're talking about.
Okay, good.
And welcome.
Yeah, great. And then, and in fact, the staff was going to continue to make sure that we got, all the ISDs and all included in that. The second one is that through our our franchise agreements with Time Warner and such, we get funding that this year, we use it to run Channel 6 and all, and that something changed at the federal level, so we were only allowed to use it for capital investments, and which made us sort of capital resource rich. And we were allowed to transfer some of those funds to AISD, and I can't remember the amount. It was do you know what I'm talking about, Mel?
I do know what you're talking about, and it was $250,000.
All right.
Very significant, and
Yeah.
we thank you.
And so that you all can use that for capital improvements for your access. Yeah. So I appreciate that staff is continuing to look for ways to help.
And I was going to say, and we are, and I think the mayor has an excellent idea. I think it would be good for us to bring back an update and let you know of other initiatives that we've got going, because there's always a number of things that we're looking at constantly on that. So we'll be happy to bring that update.
Okay, Councilman Morris.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Tova. Which one's which?
Usually they get.
You know, when I was speaking the other day with Trustee Schneider, he raised the question of whether or not there had ever actually been a presentation at the joint subcommittee of that matrix and the update, and I wasn't sure that there had been, so.
I'm certain that there was, but it was a long time ago already, and we certainly could bring it back if that's your wish.
Well, it might be useful at least to distribute the update. As part of our council retreat, I know the staff went through the matrix and did an update to talk about some of the ongoing initiatives, so I think making that available to the members would be useful, and then I leave it to y'all on, you know, how much of a focus to make it.
Okay. Other thoughts or comments? Okay, apologize, got a couple of sort of random things. One is, I think this group, it might be helpful if we could create some sort of, we do this for our own task force. It's a charter or charge, you may remember, to say, okay, what is it we really want them to do? Because I think sometimes you can start the group and just have them go, because they kind of an area, maybe judicial supports, it may not have had as pure, but they kind of know the space they're playing in. This one could be anything. And I think it might be helpful to get some parameters around what we're trying them to do and what we're looking for them to come out with, and if it's policy recommendations, because it could go in lots of different directions that this body could approve. The second is, I think one effort that they need to look at is what's existing, not just even the recommendations, but I know the school district has a bond program. We're looking at 13. We're looking at, they've got a boundary advisory committee and some other efforts, which is how do they play in those? Is there something that in that effort impacts that? Because in parallel to this effort, we've got a lot of pressure about how do we better utilize our facilities. If you got a boundary task force that's looking at potentially changing boundaries, does that go counter to what might actually this group was going to come up with, and then it's hard to undo it? And boundaries are the holy wars of school board business anyways. So that is crazy. Another area which can be a challenge is the student enrollment versus the student population. Because we can do, back to this idea of repurposing and joint use and programmatic things that draw students in to go attend these schools, but that doesn't mean they live in the neighborhood. And sometimes that means different programming than maybe a traditional neighborhood attendance zone school would want. And the people that are there may feel like, well, that's not what I want for my kid, but that's what you need to draw in. And there are some patterns of other school districts where they've had a different situation. We're a growing school district. We're getting bigger, but our growth is around the outside of the donut. It's not as much in the center city. And a lot of other school districts are just shrinking, so it's an easier conversation because they've gone from 70,000 kids to 40, and they just clearly have too many excess facilities. And they've looked at repurposing some of those facilities to draw people in that are programmatic uses, joint use, that may be design schools for art, or they're very specialty focused, and that draws in a group of people, but it may not be the neighborhood attendance zone elementary school anymore, because they've created they're utilizing the facility well, but not necessarily retaining every neighborhood elementary school. There could be some challenges, because part of it, we're still going to be driven by, to keep a neighborhood attendance zone, is do we have neighborhood kids? And I think the suggestion about housing and what attracts that, but that's one that I think the school district can try to say what we need, but it may be harder for us to have policies per se. That may be more in the purview of the city and the county about who lives where and what kind of housing and jurisdictions or decisions are made there. The economics, I will say thank you for the resolution earlier, as we mentioned, but I can tell you from the school district standpoint, right now, there's a little bit of an unknown because the school finance litigation is going on. You got a legislative session happening. There seems to be a surplus coming out of this biennium, which may or may not be translated to additional resources to public ed or anybody the next session, because some people are talking about that should be more tax cuts or whatever. So I don't think we have an idea what our fiscal landscape is going to look like over the next couple of years. So this may be a great idea, but if the school district ends up having another $50 million budget cut, it could be sort of, but it could be sort of an all bets are off, because it may be that we're in such a dire situation that it could be that from an operational cost, we'd love to have facilities, we just don't have any money to operate them. You know, we have capital costs, but we don't have money to operate the facilities. So there could be some challenges that I think people have to take the context. The other thing you mentioned, joint use facilities. We've had some great examples between Pickle, Turner Roberts we're working on, but there's some others. But some of it is going to be the facility side of things, which I know you have a bond program that you've already approved. We're looking at a 2013 potential bond. There's, just like y'all, we're over $1 billion of identified needs, and there hasn't even come up with everything yet. We're not going to go for $1 billion. But some of the joint facility things are really, how do you design facilities that can better serve the needs of kids? Some of that actually makes more sense almost around the periphery, where we have really high growth, because we have schools, I think we've mentioned this before, north of 183 that have 1,100 kids in the elementary school. Those families need lots of stuff. And so the challenge of something like this is, at the same time the school district's trying to meet the needs of the center city kids, the percentage of our kids, the number of our kids in the center city are much smaller relative to the number of kids that are out on the outside of the city. So north of 183, we have 8,000 kids in 9 elementary schools and 400 kids that we've moved to Lucy Reed. So there's going to be a mix of challenges that the center city and these older schools gets a lot of attention and a lot of visibility. The voices that are out around these highly overcrowded schools may not be as vocal, but the needs are just as great. So the school district's having to balance those about how do you give the resources to kids. And that group out there is 95% poverty, incredibly high mobility, multiple language kind of communities. The Lanier High School has 50 different languages spoken at home. The needs out there are enormous. So I know this sounds like it's very center city focused, but I think we need to make sure that we also put it in the context of all of the other needs that the district's trying to battle with, and the resources available. So, I mean, it's an important thing to do, but it's can't be done in isolation, and we don't want to pit battles between parts of the city where someone feels like we're doing something that's serving center city, but we're at the same time hurting, a different part of town with a lot of kids. But I know there's a lot of work to do, so I think a charter and charge would be helpful to make sure we're clear what we want them to do, have them look at the existing efforts, the recommendations that are already on the table, working with the school district, and then kind of, going in a process that allows, maybe some periodic updates and check-ins to make sure that they don't get too far out in front and then come back with something that's just not tenable or doable in either the budget landscape or the political context of the entire city. Welcome, Mr. Schneider. Thank you. Are you well-trained at this point?
Not at all, actually. I had a 20-minute meeting at 10:30 that lasted an hour and a half. So.
We have to get you to just be quiet and stop talking. Okay, do you want to weigh in on this topic?
I'm strictly flying by the seat of the pants, as it was. But the only thing that I would add, and Ms. Tubbo, thank you for the discussion earlier that we've had on this. I do appreciate the insight. And as I brought up, I think, with our staff, and I know I brought it up with Ms. Tubbo as well, is that the one thing that I would really like to see is some metrics and defining, when do we know we've succeeded, basically. And totally agree with the policy recommendations, and Mark, with your comments as well. But I'm still, struggling with how do we get to a point where we've identified things that are, we've reached some kind of metric where we say we've won, basically. And the only thing that I thought of in the week here that I've been trying to work on this is that, and it kind of relates to another item that's on the agenda, which is the educational impact statement, is that if we can somehow come up with, we've put 40% more kids in an under-enrolled school, or we've been successful in identifying something in terms of we need to build a school somewhere simply because we're getting much more housing than we thought we were going to get, whether it's through single-family, multifamily, or whatever. But I would like to kind of think about and work on, that end of things where, metrics that we hit to know that we got there.
Maybe that's one of the things, that may not be as clear in the outset, what those metrics need to be, but maybe that's part of it is going to be how do they define elements of progress. You know, what is it they're going to look at? There could be some, and again, looking at some of the other cities, there may be some examples of what that looks like. Certainly from our standpoint, utilization of our facilities is really important. And I think the superintendent's come out pretty clear, even though there had been a task force where there was lots of discussion about potential closing schools, it never, you know, there were options explored, never got to a recommendation from the task force or a recommendation from the superintendent, or even an option from the superintendent. So I think there's a strong sense that the community values its neighborhood schools. But at this point, I think trying to figure out what we're trying to achieve and what are the levers we have to use, because it's going to be tough. I mean, if we end up with a different economic landscape than what we're looking at now, even worse, we're in a who knows kind of ballgame. Let's hope it doesn't get there. Let's hope I'm crying wolf. But we don't know. So thanks to you, your resolution will hopefully help the lawsuit. And maybe that'll give us a little bit more relief than we're anticipating. That was great. So thank you. Mayor.
Just on the optimistic note, we heard yesterday from our budget officer that the last monthly sales tax report was up about 25% year over year.
Wow.
And that many other cities around the state had experienced the same thing. Of course, 1 month doesn't establish a trend, but it is a little bit optimistic, and maybe the state will just have all kinds of money next
Well,
year.
they're 25% year over year.
Crazy.
That's buying lots of stuff. Wow. Okay, that's great. Other comment, Councilman Morrison?
I wonder if we could try to filter this down and get some very specific suggestions on action. And I'll throw some out just to get us started.
Yeah.
I think it would be terrific at this point to pull together the work group, to get them talking. I think we have, you know, for this focus that's written here, I don't think anyone disagrees, but I think what we want is something more specific than that. So, and, you know, with specific goals and metrics and maybe more specific tasks and some suggestions. And so I wondered if one way to do it would be to start with our work group and have them sort of, you know, I think the folks on the work group are experts in this area, have them come up with some ideas, but also maybe we could all independently do that and have something on the agenda next time to finalize it. Just an idea. I would love to see some very specific steps lined out.
Councilman Tobler?
I think that sounds great, and I agree that it, you know, pulling together the folks and having them start thinking about it would make sense, and then allowing that charge to be finalized. The one thing I should have pointed out is that part of the thought is that the joint use would be a consideration for existing facilities as a potential solution for some of the facilities that are perhaps not as well utilized as the district would like to see. So I hope that will be clear in the charge that we eventually distribute.
Okay,
And thanks very much for your comments. I appreciate your discussion about the very different landscape on the outer part of the district. And, you know, I think this is really designed at figuring out what are some possible recommendations we might consider because of the, you know, real scarcity of resources, but because of the several times that we've had community discussions about potential closures. And boy, if we had only known, we could have, you know,
Right.
perhaps, I mean, this is our opportunity to say, well, you know, what tools do we have?
Well, I think to this idea of metrics, if the committee, it's almost, what problem are we trying to solve? You know, what is it that's even spurring us to create this committee? So what data, what are the metrics we're looking at now that tell us that we have a problem that we need to try to solve, or something that we're anticipating happen? And then I don't know if we'll get to a point that we can say we ever won, Robert, but, you know, can we say that we're winning? You know, is there a way to say that the trend is going in the right direction? Or does it then give us the data to allow us, if we have to make an unpleasant decision, we can see that we've done all that we can, and therefore it allows us to do something different. And then it may allow us to have a set of metrics that we can maybe, once this group is center city focused, but can apply around the rest of the city so people can also understand the context of the whole, which is, we may look at one challenge, but it's not in isolation. And I think the pulling some of that together may be helpful, and then coming back at the next meeting to say, okay, this is where we think it stands, this is what we have, and then can we propose some sort of charter charge that maybe builds on what Councilman Montalvo, thank you for putting this together, does, and then to the extent lists the existing efforts that we already know are underway, and also looks at the existing recommendations and with an update about that, and then say, okay, does that all that go together make sense to go to the next step? So not starting doing any work yet, but just sort of getting a feel for where it stands on multiple fronts as of today. Okay, that's great. Thank you all. Okay, so move to an update on the Literacy Coalition. Welcome, Meg. While she's walking up, I should have said earlier, when you were talking about truancy, it popped in my head. It's kind of bounced around a couple times. I started thinking about this judge right here who actually, you started this conversation with truancy and then truancy plus, and the next thing you know, it's become this massive connecting the dots. So thank you for getting us launched on this whole effort. It turned out to be a lot bigger maybe than you first thought. But I still remember the conversation about we need to look at truancy plus. If we go on plus, plus, plus to the third power. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Meg Pogue, and I'm the director of the Literacy Coalition of Central Texas, and it's great to be back again. I think it was just about a year ago today, almost, that the joint subcommittees voted to launch a public awareness campaign for literacy. And the goal of this is really we're realizing that a lot of the problems that AISD is facing with kids coming into school not ready, it has a lot to do with the parents in the community and our whole community's response to the issue. So we launched the campaign on May 9th, and we're here to give you an update. It has been a really incredible, thank you, an incredible collaborative effort. We've had a steering committee, an advisory committee, consisting of over 20 agencies, nonprofits, and different city departments, county departments, and also the libraries in the school district have been very involved in the planning and implementation. And really there were two goals for the campaign. And so the handout that you have, the first side of the handout that looks like this is about that first wave of the campaign that was really to try and elevate the issue of literacy in the community. Most people in Austin really had no idea about what was happening with our families and the literacy rates and the nature of the struggles, and people weren't relating that as an economic issue. So we hired a marketing expert and worked also with the marketing department at UT and a bunch of other stakeholders, and we came up with the brand Literacy Illuminates. The purpose is to try and spread a very positive message about literacy. It's not just about children being able to read words. Literacy is about a family's ability to thrive in the community. It's an economic issue, and it's an intergenerational issue. So you can see a lot of the materials we've developed for the campaign are really trying to make the issue real and visceral for people. So we developed images like a medicine bottle and the message of a person's literacy level is the best indicator of their health status. We're trying to link it to economics. 43% of adults with low literacy skills live in poverty. And so this message has gone out very widely. Our goal was to reach 150,000 residents with the message. To date, we estimate that we've reached 461,000 residents. The way that we're measuring that is by when we have large employers send out a media kit or we post a poster or have a bus sign, we ask them to tell us what kind of visibility, how many people are going to be coming through the doors or riding the buses. We had a great strategy with some of our campaign folks where we're using a Cap Metro bus sign during the ACL festival. So ridership skyrockets in October, and we actually have a copy of, that's basically what it's going to look like on the inside of the buses. We have scrambled wording so that people notice it and then read the message of, wow, 1 in 5 adults in Austin can't read or write well enough to read a bus map or fill out a job application. And we're also letting people know that free services are available, and we have those up in English and Spanish.
So if they're going to ACL, they'll probably notice it. If they're coming back from ACL, they may,
Right.
they may be going, boy, everything's scrambled.
So maybe
Sorry.
we'll reduce the estimate of 270,000 a little bit for the return trips. So it's been an exciting process, and we've had incredible engagement of partners just from every sector. People have been very excited about the campaign. Even, large employers being willing to send out messages and images and put up web banners. We've been really trying to use very low-cost methods to get the message out, and we feel like we've been really successful in doing that. And so then the second half of the campaign, or the second goal, was after we did the visibility raising, we really wanted to reach out to those families who were in need. So the second strategy was to find people who may be adults who need literacy services, or parents who may not understand what they should be doing to help their kids at home. And so this part of the campaign also has been just incredible, very successful, and partners have been coming out of the woodwork. KLRU, HEB, Half Price Books, Velocity Credit Union, Univision. We've been just hitting everyone we can who has access to the population. We've created, I think you guys have this brochure, Help Your Child Learn to Read. There's 4,000 in English and 4,000 in Spanish. Again, thanks to Travis County Print Shop. And these are really beautiful. I was amazed at how well Travis County Print Shop is doing with all of this, because our designer has some pretty high demands. So they've been very gracious in working with her on how everything looks. But these tips for parents also include a little bit of information about what's happening at school and in pre-K programs, so that parents can complement what's happening in schools and prepare their child for school. And these tips are based on a lot of research done by the National Reading Panel. So it's nothing we made up here locally. It's everything that's on here, evidence, a lot of research shows that if parents do these things, it really does help their kids. So this is going out to 8,000 families, again, through partnerships, through the WIC clinics, through Travis County Community Centers. Everywhere that there are professionals who are interacting with people who are vulnerable and at high risk for low literacy, that's really where we're targeting these materials. We're also providing trainings for area professionals, social workers, caseworkers, on how do you identify when someone has a literacy barrier. So if you work for Travis County Rent and Utility Assistance and someone's clearly having trouble filling out the form, what do you do with that? So we're going and training hundreds of people on what do you do when someone has limited English or is having trouble filling out a form, and how do you make a warm referral right there using our searchable database so that you can talk with a family while they're there for their rent assistance, talk to them about free programs available. Hey, look, there's one in your neighborhood. It's on a bus route and they have childcare. Here's their phone number. So we find this to be the most effective strategy for outreach. And I joke about this, but you really can't put up a billboard that says, learn how to read, call this number. You have to find people where they're at, right? So that's what we've been working actually with all of you and your staff and about 100 other nonprofits in the community to be able to reach the population where they're at. It's also been a great learning experience for us. We have never tried to launch a massive public awareness campaign. And so it's been exciting to see the enthusiasm, and I think we've had a lot of ideas that we've had to put on the parking lot for other ways, putting up a mural, doing a lot of other things in the community that would certainly help the goals. So for this first year, we definitely chose things that would be very low cost and high leverage. And the committee of the 20 agencies that have been working on this with us, we're going to be formalizing that and making it a permanent body. And we really hope to continue this campaign long term. And so that is another proposal for action is I would love the opportunity to talk more with your staff and see if we can continue this campaign, and if so, how, and what additional strategies we could use in future years.
Thank you very much. I thought about saying how you're sort of dressed like your button, but I noticed that the
I'm
constant
glad you
collar scheme, it's
noticed.
just kind of everything is sort of going, it's all works together. It's beautiful. Okay, let's open up for comments or questions. Councilman Washington? Nothing?
Well,
I was,
what does that mean?
I'm not sure. Take it how you will.
This is fabulous. It's really exciting and leveraging all the community resources together because I think this is a pretty low-cost campaign you have going on. Can you remind us how much
It was
money we've invested?
about $70,000, not including in-kind printing from Travis County.
Right, that's terrific. I guess, well, congratulations on it. It looks very successful. I have two questions. Is there, the metrics that we have are very clear-cut and detailed, and there's no doubt that we can count them. Do we ever think that we could see our campaign resulting in measurable increases in literacy? I mean, it's such a complicated topic, and so many things impact it, but have you given
Right.
any thought to that?
There's kind of two answers to that question. The first is, we're trying to refer people into these programs that are very evidence-based, and they're showing really good gains in improving people's literacy skills when they're in these GED and ESL classes. So we know that when we're referring people in and they're getting instruction, it is working. The second answer to the question is you have to look at research, and what research tells us happens as a result of certain activities. So we know that when parents are more engaged in their child's early reading development, they do much better in school. So we're really targeting our efforts at places where research has told us when you do interventions here, it does result in those big, community-wide big impact measures of kids entering school more prepared, having better attendance and better grades, and then also adults being more economically self-sufficient. For example, when someone in Austin gets their GED, their annual income goes up by about $9,000 annually. It only takes about $500 to get someone their GED. So there's economic payoff.
Right.
But as far as the campaign and what we're measuring, we're trying to measure the activities that we're doing and where people are going.
Sure.
And we have discussed looking at even being able to track specific families where their parents are in a community-based literacy program and their kids, and when they're entering school, what's happening with those kids. So that was another kind of longer-term goal with AISD, is to be able to share client information by family and look at how the kids are doing of those parents, rather than to just rely on research, but to see the actual impact here in Austin, Travis County.
That's interesting, and that really circles back to the discussion we had on one of our first agenda items in terms of having an overall connected database and all. I don't know if were you here for that?
No, I wasn't.
So that, maybe that could be a long-term goal, because that would provide some really interesting success metrics. And then the second question is, how do we make this a sustainable, evolving capability in our city, in our community, because it's definitely something I think that we should try to evolve and sustain.
We've been applying for different kinds of corporate support. We have gotten some corporate contributions toward the campaign, which has been wonderful, from Seton, Velocity Credit Union, HEB, and we have a proposal with the Community Foundation as well. So actually, AISD and I together went and met with the Community Foundation, and they're considering a proposal. So we are hoping for private community support for this as well, to really match what you guys have put on the table. And of course, the Literacy Coalition, this is part of our core mission. So we've also been putting forward our own resources to make it sustainable. And then, of course, the effort of the 20 agencies who've been steering all of this is all in kind. I think to make it sustainable, we still are probably going to need some support from city, county, school district, if it does seem like a goal that's worth pursuing. But we are definitely trying to figure out how to make it very sustainable and ingrained in the community across sectors long term. So it's still pretty early. And if you have ideas about that, I would also love to talk with you about it.
Well, as you mentioned, this is a pilot program, and what might be interesting now that you've got this under your belt would be to envision, say, a sustainable but really lay out a 5-year plan, and what would that look like, and some funding goals for that could help us see sort of the big picture.
Great. I can definitely work on that with the help of staff, too.
Absolutely.
Let us know how much you need from the city.
I was going to ask you about funding sources, potential funding sources, and suggest if you're talking about sustainable long-term effort, which it probably should be, it seems like something that would be very popular in the business sector, for example. They would have a huge interest in this, and that's a source of funding that probably should be explored at some level. We've had a little bit of success at the city. For example, this year we're funding our Trail of Lights Festival entirely with private funding, where it used to be a city project. This year, the city is obviously involved, but the funding comes from people like HEB and the Seton family of hospitals. I don't want to leave anybody out. There's a whole long list of people that are willing to help fund really good causes.
We've definitely submitted probably 20 proposals to local companies and tried to meet with people as well. So I actually think it'll be easier to do that fundraising now that there's stuff to show them and results to show. In the beginning, it was a new idea. And so now we're hoping to be able to draw in more of that kind of support as well.
Other comments or questions? Judge, anything?
You'll be sure to chat with Ms. Fleming
Yes,
regarding what the county might do.
I've been chatting with
Okay.
Ms. Fleming and Mr. Lyman. Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Thank you for doing this. I'm going to throw a couple of things that you probably are already on top of this, but one of the challenges, it seems like, and I'm focused on your goal 3 about parents, is really, do they have books? So it's great, we say go read with your kids, but a lot of the families don't. You're probably familiar with or connected to La Feria and Sylvia Acevedo. If you're not, she gives out, I think, 10,000 books. So it's a
We're
huge
very-
thing, but making sure that we're the part of that. The second is, I don't know how much we do, is our teen parents. Sadly, we have hundreds of teen parents in AISD that they themselves, hopefully, if they're a teen parent and they're in a high school, they can read, but I'm not sure they fully understand what they need to be doing to help their kids to read. And so that it might be an easy connection to help through all the teen parents we have at the schools that we have that. And third, I think you probably got that, is the pre-Ks and the child care centers. I'm presuming that's all part of what you're trying to do about helping those groups. Okay. That's great. So those are easy things to say, go do more of that, and then you may need some resources to do that, and I understand. So hopefully our teams are partnering together to try to find that. But it's a great initiative. Thank you for doing it.
Thanks.
Yeah, great job.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
When you get crowd applause, that's a big sign right there. That's a tough audience. We don't ever get any of that kind of stuff up here, so we'd like to see when others get it. Okay, we just to update, we have a quorum now, so we'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting if somebody is so interested and compelled. Or if they want to take a minute to look at it, they can do that too.
Move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second discussion? All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Okay, thank you all very much. Minutes are approved. Okay, welcome. We are going to move to a next update on the educational impact, which got, I think maybe before you two guys were even in here, it came up. This is a persistent topic, so we're anxiously awaiting y'all's visiting with us. So thanks for being here again.
Great.
We'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Afternoon. My name is George Adams. I'm with the city's Planning and Development Review Department and joined by Paul Turner.
Paul Turner, AISD Facilities.
So we were before the committee last in June of this year and provided kind of a refresher or an overview on the EIS process as it exists today. And we ran through the results to date as of that time in terms of the number of educational impact statements that we had generated in coordination with AISD staff. So today I'm reporting back on a couple of other items that came up during that meeting. The first, there was interest in exploring whether other area school districts wanted to participate in the EIS process. And just yesterday, we heard back from the last of the 6 that we've contacted. They've all indicated that they would like to participate in that process. And so we will be moving forward with a rules posting under the city's process to incorporate that into the applications that currently require the EIS. So when a project that requires an EIS comes in one of those school districts, will then distribute the information to that school district, and they'll generate, hopefully, the EIS. It may be a challenge for some of them because they do have much more limited staff resources than, some of the smaller districts. Because of the way that process is set up, it takes a while to move it through the city's system. We anticipate that having that fully in place in April of next year, and unfortunately, it's a defined process. We have to go out and engage stakeholders, and it's hard to make shortcuts in that process. The other item I wanted to mention, there was interest in a periodic report that might highlight the level of development activity and number of EISs and those sorts of things. And we've had preliminary discussions with our IT folks, and we think we can do that. We would, what we'd like to commit to, it's kind of a under-promise and hopefully over-deliver, but we think by the early part of next year, January, February of next year, we can have this in place, have it generated periodically on a quarterly or potentially even a monthly basis. And it would include, the number of development applications, the type of applications, the number of units, the ISD that those applications are located in, whether EIS or the number of EISs that are generated as a result of those. And, we're open to other information that we can kind of easily harvest from our database if there's other topics that would be of interest. So with that, that's kind of my points for today.
That's great. Thanks, Mayor.
Could you remind us all what triggers an EIS?
Yes, Mayor. It's triggered by applications that require Planning Commission approval. So typically on the zoning cases, well, there's two triggers. There's the Planning Commission approval, and then there's a unit threshold. So for multifamily projects or multifamily zoning, there's I believe a 200-unit threshold. For single family, there's a 100-unit threshold, and then there's a few other variations for properties that are older than, I believe it's 20 years. The threshold drops down. Let's see, did I cover all of that? So Planning Commission approval, and then the types of applications. And then the thresholds.
Okay.
I believe it was here that we had this discussion, perhaps in June, about how flexible the process is in terms of considering different thresholds for different areas. And I know that's not as it's set up right now, but it does seem to me that in certain areas, it might be something worth considering, that in certain areas of town, the threshold of 200 units is quite high. If we're looking at an area of town where the schools are already at capacity, and I assume that will probably be true as the staff works to develop a process for the districts outside of AISD, that 200 may not be exactly the right number for them. They may need to work on what thresholds would trigger a situation that is of concern to them, or not of concern, but worth, something that they need to plan for. So have you had any opportunity to think a little bit more about some of the suggestions that maybe it was Trustee Schneider who raised last time about, the need, when you have contiguous lots, that can have a impact that's much greater than the individual, than it would be otherwise. And then, we've encountered other situations like that, but I'll stop talking and see if.
That was essentially my question as well, is that, we had discussed modifying the threshold in some way. Because, as I think I've said before, I just view this as a tool to gather information, we're not trying to prevent, stop, whatever. But if we still have the same thresholds that we have, it's still, to me, something that we need to take a look at in terms of, capturing those ones and twos and fives and 20s that are popping up and, sending more kids to schools. And like I know in my part of the world, we may get, I can think of 3 right around the Circle C area as an example, that are going to be less than 200 units of single family, but they're sure going to send a lot of kids to the Baldwins and the Kikers and the Claytons. So, I'd be very interested in learning more about how we can possibly modify that. Just capture the information. That's all we're trying to do. So.
Well, a couple of thoughts. I think part of our hope is by generating this periodic report that we would begin to gather more of the data. I think if the desire though is to lower the threshold, we can certainly look at that. My initial thought is from a staff perspective, it would be simpler to kind of lower it across the board rather than trying to identify the areas where it should be lower than the current levels. It just kind of adds another layer of complexity to the process. And so if that's the desire of the committee, we can certainly look at that. And I think the timing would be good. It would be something that we could incorporate into the rules process that we're going to be doing anyway to broaden this for the other ISDs.
And I think there is a concern about, how much work are we creating here in this process?
Right.
And what kind of time increases are we going to see in the process as it goes through the Planning Commission and wherever else it needs to go? But at the same time, I take Robert's point that it would be nice to have information too. So maybe there could be a part of it that's just focused on a quarterly report or semi-annual report that shows what kind of development has taken place, so they can. It seems to me like that might be a good planning tool for them.
Because I almost, you have a graph that talks about where you have, how many homes are between the 0, 25, 25, 50, 50, 100, 100, 200. If the sweet spot in terms of where the most are in some 100 to 200, then you can go 200, but it could be that you need to at least have some update, because when you may add up that 100 to 200, Robert described, that may actually be bigger than what we're gathering by everything above 200. And it's just some way of knowing so you can plan, and Paul and his team can be prepared. And if we are doing bonds, are we going to need new school facilities or expansions or portables or whatever?
Right.
So, but I think you're right. It may be 2 owners do it every day, but is there a way to periodically get a report that says what we think the numbers are? And I think we can probably, the neighborhoods Robert's talking about, I'm pretty sure we can have a pretty good idea. If you put a house in that neighborhood, we probably have a reasonable good sense of how many kids are going to come out of that, because there's some patterns that exist. So other neighborhoods may be different, but in some of the higher growth neighborhoods, you get a better sense of that. Councilmember Morrison.
I want to add one comment, and that was last time there was another issue that was raised, and that was that sometimes we are maybe not catching something that in essence is going to exceed the threshold because it might be considered different cases. Do you know, is there something, like if you have adjacent lots and they're being developed sort of in a unified way, is that a practical issue? Are we really running into that? And is there a way around it if we are?
Well, I think on the site plan side, if there were an interest in gaming it, they would have to bring in 2 different site plans. And, theoretically, you could, with the current thresholds, you could have 299 unit, multifamily projects side by side.
That's a lot of
from a
extra
from a practical point
expense.
of view, I don't know how much we would run into that. I mean, it is maybe on the subdivision side, single-family subdivision side, it's potentially more likely, because you could have different sections of a subdivision that might be coming in more like that. But I think if we're looking at lowering the threshold along with, broadening the number of ISDs, we would capture some of that.
Well, and I think, Councilmember Tovo, it was your point last time. Did you have some other specific situations in mind?
There were two examples that I recall, and I've forgotten the exact specifics. One was there were 2 different addresses, or there were 2 adjacent lots. It was a property down on South Lamar, I think. It's been a while, so I don't remember it. carefully. And then the other I thought may have had to do with two different zoning categories that were, I think it was the project up on Burnett. But in any case, I think it might be, maybe as you look at perhaps lowering the threshold a little bit and doing a rules process, maybe there's some language that would encompass it that, if there are two projects moving forward that are immediately adjacent to one another, that those collectively be considered as adding toward the threshold. I think that would probably cover the couple examples I'm remembering. And, in both cases, I don't think there was an interest in, it wasn't somebody who was trying to skirt around the EIS. In fact, I think at least one of them may have gone ahead and done some of that work anyway in response to our questions. It was just, at the front end, they didn't believe they needed to, and staff didn't either. But it was, the cumulative effect of the project obviously added up to the same threshold. And I like the idea. I'm sorry I didn't understand, Mr. Adams, when you were explaining about the periodic reports, that those would include all of the development projects. So that, in effect, does capture the smaller things that have a cumulative impact on an area. And I take your point that is probably far easier to produce than a geographically sensitive threshold would be.
And I wanted to add one other thing. One of the issues that came up last time as we started talking about an EIS, and that it was originally intended not just for specific developments, but for policies and ordinance and code changes. And so I wanted to ask do we have something, and I think we maybe had missed that before.
Right.
Do we have something in the works so that that'll be part of our system from now on?
We've gotten the word out to staff that is part of the requirement.
We actually responded to one of those this week. We had, and I'm not remembering the specific details of it right this second, but we did get one of those kinds of requests for an EIS to interpret whether or not that was going to have an impact on anything that we needed to give attention to. And I'm sorry I didn't bring it. I should have brought it down because. Right. But that is in play now at this point.
Because
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, just to follow up on that, I'm just thinking that, last night on our agenda, we had a couple of code changes that actually, hearings for them that actually got postponed. And my guess is they wouldn't have a big impact on education, but I guess we can expect to start seeing anytime we see a public hearing for code changes in the backup, there will be an EIS.
We certainly hope so.
That's the goal.
Yes.
If I could
Okay,
mention
yes.
one other thing that I think that we can work together on, our demographer, well, first of all, we get all the development notices from the city through we registered as a citywide neighborhood association so that we would get that information.
And you read every single one of them, don't you, Mr.
We go
Turner?
through every one of them. We pass them to the demographer. We actually keep a spreadsheet of information to be able to kind of compare with what he's getting to see whether or not we're on the same page. That's something we can share with, work with George on, because, not that he doesn't have it too, but we're going to be looking specifically at these ratios in particular parts of town, because in some parts of town we have more multifamily, denser development, and so the numbers of kids that we would get out of those are going to be greater than in some other areas. And as Mr. Snyder said, there may be other parts of the district where you just have a lot of kids who are living in multifamily that we also need to take into account. That's something that we can kind of stay in touch on. We touch base regularly, but that might be a kind of a circle around that we could do to try to give George the info we're getting from our demographer in terms of what he's projecting for numbers of kids in those areas too. So.
Well, and that actually sort of relates to something that we talked about before you all showed up for your agenda item, and that is talking about the neighborhoods and families and schools, work group. One of the things that I had suggested is, and it would delve down a little deeper, and that is to get a grip on what kinds of housing families are living in or tending toward, because that could actually be policy guidance for us if we're trying to encourage more families in one particular area. So a lot of good data there to work from.
Actually, that raised a question for me, Mr. Turner. At this point, it seems like the EIS, as I've seen, have used the same formula, have used a consistent formula for multifamily, for estimating the number of children in a multifamily. Do you anticipate a time where, with the demographer, with your demographer's help, that formula might be adjusted depending on what part of town? It would seem to me that that would be very important.
We do have that right now in some parts of town. For example, in the north central part of the city, although there's not a lot of development going on up there because it's really developed. But we're using a ratio that generates more students in multifamily, particularly because we seem to have instances where we're having more than one family living in a unit. And so we have done some adjusting in those kinds of instances because, you know, our previous formulas are not giving us accurate enough information.
Great, okay. I guess we haven't seen any in different parts of town because it's been a pretty standard formula.
I think there's just not been a lot of development in that area because it's already so developed
Sure.
there.
Thank you.
But kids keep showing up. What happens is those units just stay, and all of a sudden, there's new kids coming out of those units. Mayor?
I was just going to say, why don't we have our demographer talk to your demographer?
We actually.
Maybe you'll eliminate all the middlemen.
He actually comes and co-presents with us each January when we do our annual demographic update. We depend on him a lot because of all the great knowledge that he has about the city as a whole, and so we're very grateful to you guys for sharing him with us.
He knows a lot of things.
He really does. And he's a former school demographer, too, so, in a different city
And he's a
outside
parent,
of Atlanta.
he's a parent of an AISD kid. So other questions or comments on this one? Bert?
If I could just interject, I think we're going to check with Judge Bisco, since if he could stay for a second, since this is posted for action, our recommendation is that if it is the desire of this group, which obviously it is, to make some changes, specifically like changing the threshold, we would recommend some specific action. That way we can take it to our respective bodies. As a matter of fact, I believe we have an item that's going to be coming up to City Council here pretty quick from our end of it to move this forward. So since we are posted for action, I would recommend that we try to do that and see if we can get the judge to participate before he leaves.
So what would be the specific recommendation that you think you're hearing or that, that you'd like us to take action on?
I'll let George kind of encapsulate what he's heard, but obviously one of those is the threshold requirement, that one particular change, and then any others as well.
I guess in the interest of being comprehensive, I would suggest direct staff to look at options for lowering the threshold for an EIS, to move forward with a rules posting for to broaden the EIS to other school districts, and then to move forward with generating a periodic development report.
Councilman Tovo?
That sounds like a good list. Though we have done one of those things already, I believe, with regard to extending the EIS to other, but it would be,
So
if it's helpful to you to have this body's endorsement of that, we certainly could. And then if we could add to that, just, let's see, something along the lines of creating a mechanism to capture situations where developments on contiguous lots might not individually trigger the threshold, but should trigger an EIS.
Okay.
Or properties that have different zoning, if I'm right in thinking. that
One
was
of the more
one of the
crisply worded
situations.
motions we've ever had, but I think you get the gist of it. So I don't know if we have, Mel, is it sufficiently worded for you to be able to roll with that?
It is, and it's taken.
Okay.
Most
So
importantly.
so we'll take that as a motion?
And I'm sure you can come up with a few appropriate whereas statements, so. I'll
So,
second.
second discussion, all in favor? Aye,
Aye.
opposed, aye, thank you very much.
Show the county judge voting in favor.
That's right. We thank the county judge for accommodating us. Okay, very good. Can I throw one thing, and it's like you guys have a million things to do, but I'm just curious, I don't think we have to do it, but you talked about the Children and Family and Community and Neighborhood Task Force, whatever the name we're going to call it, and what you're doing in the demographer. Have we done, Mel, this maybe, have we looked at the census and said, okay, how many kids actually live in school attendance zones, and then actually how many are going there? I mean, do we have a sense of market share? And because we look at some of these schools, this is me a data, you don't have to get it now, but it's just a data point for maybe this committee to find out back to what problem we're trying to solve. If we know, because some of it could be we have under-enrollment in schools, but it's just because they're not, people that live in the schools district aren't staying there or in that attendance zone, or is it because they're not there? And some of this ratio stuff of how many adults to how many kids, so when we use this ratio, that it may actually, when the census will give us a pretty indication of, I think a reasonably good indication of what the ratio might be, at least considered for parts of town. But it just seems like with the census, we have a pretty good stable of knowledge today of how many kids are living where, and how does that translate to school enrollment in those communities. And we know we can tell within AISD family of if you're in an AISD school relative to where you live versus what school you go to, we can figure that out. What we don't know is how many kids live in an attendance zone but actually do not go to an AISD school. And I think that's a helpful knowledge, and I think it's actually a very powerful indicator for the city and for development and people coming here, is that I do believe we have a reasonably high percentage of our children in AISD in the city of Austin going to the public schools, much more so than many other communities. And I think that's a selling point for why our city is strong, is because our school district is reasonably strong. So, but it doesn't happen tomorrow, it could be part, but just a data point about where are we, and it's a market share question. Ms. Schneider, I'm sorry.
Mark, that's a great question. In fact, it was one that was at the meeting I was at prior to this. But one of the things that I'd like to see, if they can capture the data, and I'm struggling to think where in the census data that might be, but if there was some indication that not only these kids go to public schools, whether it's AISD or maybe they're going to the Eanes or the Maynards, whatever, but if we could find out private schools in general, charter schools in specific as well, too, just to break down the kids that aren't going to public schools, that, see if there's a concentration of kids that are going to private schools coming from specific neighborhoods or specific communities. That would be an interesting point.
Yeah, that may be a little hard. I was just almost thinking the aggregate, if you have, I'm making up a number, you have 100 kids living in this attendance zone, and of those, 75 make it to the AISD, so 25 are going someplace else. But if you can, when you start, this becomes more of an AISD analysis
Right.
that probably says, can we get public information from charter schools to say, where do your kids come from? Private schools may be a little harder, but you know that they're going to have how many hundreds of kids. Somewhere we're going to be able to get some reasonable level at a high level. It may be harder to know by school, particularly for private, but I would think the charters, we probably could find out where they're coming from.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not saying, this kid goes to an XYG charter. I mean, charter schools in general, private schools in general, so.
Okay. One more thing for you guys to do, but not overnight. And again, we've got some time to work on it, I think, on that. Okay, anything else for these folks? Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Okay, and Sherry, you can, we got our team coming back. Oh my gosh, the dream team. We've been so fortunate to have you three working together. Okay, we will be hopefully done within less than that. So you want to, Sherry, do you have a little update just on the written report we have?
Yes. You have in your packet one written report for the Housing and School Stability Work Group. That update is in your packet. You do not have an update from the Workforce Task Force. It seems sort of a shame to give you one more piece of paper for what is a very brief update. And that is to tell you that there were sort of three key things we were working on. And that task force identified their charge was to look at those kids who needed to work to provide resources for their families. So we had children choosing between school and work because of a need of their families. And so we sort of have some cross-pollination between a couple of the groups, but what staff is focused on right now is identifying in your organizations those positions that might already be funded, either in a temporary or seasonal sort of way, that might be appropriate for students. So we're not so much asking for resources just yet to create those things. We wanted to find out from the county, the city, the school district, and others what positions might already exist. There was also a strong interest in figuring out if there's a way for youth to receive credit for the jobs that we might identify. So then we have a student needs to work, has a job, and gets credit. And so we are still working on that. We have a group of folks who are very passionate about that, one of which is Mr. Swanson in the audience here. And so we just want to reassure you that we're still working on that. So any support you can provide to your staff and your organization to provide us that information, we would certainly appreciate that. And I will give that same message to Judge Biscoe. I sort of know where he lives, so we'll make sure he gets that message as well.
Will somebody text him, let him know, be on the lookout for Sherry coming his way? Okay, questions or comments regarding the written reports or the verbal report? That's great. Thank you very much. Okay, so, yes, ma'am?
We do have one more thing. We did want to, under the final item there, guidance from the joint body, has to do with your December meeting. Your next scheduled meeting would fall in December. We do understand that there can be challenges with December meetings, and so we would like to hear your pleasure on that. If not a December meeting, we would offer up an alternative to a very early January meeting, possibly the first or second week in January. So your thoughts about that?
Your pleasure, folks? January?
Sounds good to me.
January? Okay. Shoot for January.
Okay, we'll
That's
go
great.
about scheduling that.
Thank you all very much. Good work. Appreciate all the effort of you three and all of the committees and task force that are working. Mr. Schneider?
Excuse me, I have one question that I'd like to at least throw out to the staff to see just where are we, what are we going to do? And it's probably pretty much a Southwest Austin specific question, but there is a fair amount of development that's going on, particularly south of SH 45 between Mopac and 1826. A lot of that development spills over into Hayes County. So it's not in AISD, but it's a good possibility those kids actually may end up attending AISD schools since there is no infrastructure in Hayes County for those folks to get there other than going back out SH 45 and then down 1826. And not to get into the Campo issues, but you know, I would like to see what the transportation plans are and what's going to be on the horizon for providing some reasonable school infrastructure in that area.
Noted, we'll get that to you.
You might see if Hayes County is going to educational impact study for that development that's actually in North Hayes County that has, for which they have no school. Just kidding. Okay, thank you all very much. Appreciate all the work. Thanks for all you all have done.
I would like to say one thing. I think this may be the last meeting that President Williams is
That is
actually
true.
with the joint subcommittees and is a member of the staff. And I just wanted to give him a great shout out. It really has been a
Thank you.
pleasure.
I wondered
Thank
when he'd
you.
been smiling the whole
Oh,
thing.
thank you. Thank you. You all do all the work, so thank you very much. Okay, we are adjourned.